Hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in to the Smarter Building podcast powered by Symetri. My name is Nicole Georgiou and I'm the Architecture, Engineering and Construction Marketing Manager at Symetri UK and will be your host for today. Every other week we chat with industry experts around best practice, new legislation, trends and technology, and one of the hot topics in the industry right now is fire safety. On today's show I'm joined by Brent Rees, partner at Ridge and Partners LLP, who is a chartered construction professional with experience in multiple industry roles, including design management, BIM and information management and architectural technology. So thanks for joining us, Brent. It's great to have you, and we're really excited to hear about your views on what the future normal post-Grenfell Tower looks like. So before we delve into all of that, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your interests and hobbies?
I can. So quite active, I suppose, by background. So have played in sort of all sorts of various sports in the past and participated in the London Marathon previously, but have been let down by dodgy knees. So tend to cycle a lot more nowadays, and cycle quite a lot actually now. And I've cycled for various cycling clubs and done various kind of sportives and things like that, and commute to work as often as I can on the bike. And more recently, my wife has bought me a paddleboard, so starting to dabble in that. I live a long way from the sea, so not really suitable for surfing, but got quite a bit of water around here, so good to do that occasionally. And kind of like music is quite a big passion of mine as well. It's been to see a lot of live music in the past, but less so in the last few years for obvious reasons. And kind of food and cooking as well. I kind of sort of head chef in my household, so quite enjoy cooking and spending a bit of time around that.
Ah, lovely. What's your famous dish then?
You put me on the spot now. I love curries of any kind really. So making curries from scratch is kind of my is my go-to thing really. I quite enjoy that.
Interesting. We'll have to try it one day. Okay. And then, so in terms of your professional background, I mentioned that you're a partner at Ridge and Partners, and you've sort of had a lot of experience in the design and BIM side of things. So yeah, if you could just give us a bit more information on your professional background.
Absolutely. So I'm a chartered architectural technologist. So I studied architectural technology at UWE in Bristol quite some time ago now. And that gave me a kind of really good grounding in the kind of technological side of design, and I guess I was really interested in how things were put together. I was kind of less of the kind of creative and design oriented type, and more about the kind of actually how does stuff go together, and actually the use of technology to do and deliver design, I suppose. And so interestingly kind of learned about BIM in university 20 or so years ago, and then spent the next however many years in industry not doing anything with it, and worked for a number of practices using kind of CAD technology, delivering kind of projects of varying sizes, but taking on more responsibility as I went on. And then at some point in 2010, had the opportunity to work in the States for a short period, which was really good. It kind of allowed me to kind of work with different teams, and I was continuing to work on projects in the UK, so that was quite challenging with regard to time differences and things. But whilst I was there, invested in myself and took on some additional courses in kind of BIM management and Revit kind of management and other things like that. And then when I came back to the UK, found myself in a position of helping the business and the office kind of embrace kind of that technology at the time, and then kind of moved on to Ridge, which was 10 years ago, in a kind of split capacity where I was part architectural technologist and part kind of BIM manager for the business. And then at some point during that time, I think it was early 2016, had an opportunity to start kind of BIM consultancy as an offering for the business, and have grown since then. You know, we now have a team of 10 plus providing information management and BIM coordination services to our own client base as well as Ridge multidisciplinary projects.
Interesting. So just going back to, you said you sort of done a bit in the US. How is that different to how we've sort of evolved with BIM in the UK, would you say?
Well, I mean, at the time I was there, the UK had just mandated it for its use in 2016. So my thinking for investing in myself then was knowing that it was going to more readily shape my kind of day-to-day working life. And I think, you know, it was that announcement of that mandate and the trajectory the UK industry has been on since that I think has pushed the UK on from other countries in the world. So I think that was quite an important tipping point. I think it was less obvious to see the differences back then, but it's probably more obvious to see how advanced and how well progressed the UK is versus some other countries in the world.
Yeah, interesting. And so how did you sort of get involved in the sort of fire stopping and building safety? We can see it sort of looks like you get involved in developing digital innovations to help with the compliance and the digitisation of this. So yeah, how did the sort of fire safety aspect come into that?
So at some point, I think it was 2015-ish, I can't really remember, we, as a Ridge multidisciplinary team, were working for a large automotive client in the Midlands, and a contractor that we were working with post-contract had posed a question to the team about how many fire stops we thought were in the design at a particular point in the design programme. And speaking transparently, I think we found it quite difficult to answer that question, and they needed to know the answer sooner because they were invested in precast concrete and wanted to know where all the openings were needed for services to pass through. So we set about trying to answer the question using the multidisciplinary models that we had first of all, and realised that actually there was probably a better way of doing this using the kind of geometry and the data that we had to hand. And so out of that, we started kind of thinking a bit more about the way we used clash detection tools to test if material A was touching material B. And rather than just testing it for those criteria, we started to test it to say, well, if material A is touching material B, can you tell me that there isn't another material C within a certain distance from it? And that starts to align and check for compliance with Firestop manufacturers' test data. And so we realised this was quite a useful kind of compliance tool and better demonstrate the safety of buildings. So we kind of continued to evolve that on a number of projects to a point where in 2019, I think it was recognised for some industry awards, which has been a really good thing for our team and the business generally. And we've been able to utilise that on further projects since.
Yeah, it's interesting because you've sort of started on that journey a bit in advance, which is, a lot of people are trying to look towards that now. And just something interesting for us, who sort of looks at that normally from your side of things? Because, we're sort of seeing it's the fire engineers where they're trying to get more readily involved in the Revit model. Do you think that's sort of going to be the way forward, or do you think it's going to sort of fall on the architects to start getting more involved in? How do you think that future collaboration is going to work?
Good question. I think it's difficult. I think personally it's difficult for all parties to be invested in authoring tools like Revit because it's quite a specialist tool, and I think for designers who are using it up to 40 hours a week and have members of the team using it for that length of time, I think it's quite easy to orientate with it and get used to it. Whereas fire engineers, I can't ever foresee having the need to be in Revit for that period of time, and therefore probably won't get as upskilled or as invested in that technology. But I think there's definite space, and there's precedent for it in the industry already of tools that are able to input information into authoring tools like Revit. So it kind of lowers the bar for those kind of non-Revit literate users to be able to influence the information that's contained within Revit models. And I think that extends beyond non-Revit literate members of project teams into client organisations as well. I find it quite frustrating when Revit models are cited as deliverable for client organisations who don't have any Revit skills or even Revit licenses within their business. So yeah, I think thinking about whether actually a Revit model is the appropriate thing or not is actually an interesting point, and then how you might input information into authoring tools is the next point.
And you mentioned that you guys have sort of won awards for what the work you've done before. So what exactly does that involve? Is it you've sort of developed a tool, or is it just a process, or is it certain projects that you've actually done that on that's warranted those rewards?
Yeah,
awards?
a combination, I suppose. So we've used Symetri as a tool within which you can write rule sets to better check for different things within models. So we've written rule sets that do that kind of fire stop compliance checking piece. But in order to get to the point where you can use that readily, you kind of have to set up a few steps in a design team's process to get there, to make sure that information is structured appropriately and entered appropriately, and that you've agreed certain things with the team from almost a kind of specification and kind of almost a commercial perspective as well. So an example might be that we could go through all the work of implementing this process pre-contract, but if the if the fire stop manufacturer isn't nominated into the main contract, then the contractor has every opportunity to value engineer or change the specification, which then changes the test data, which means all the work that's been done pre-contract is of no use. So it's kind of combination of process and the use of technology and rule sets, and then some evidence of how we've used that on some of our projects that's led to the awards.
Excellent. And are you sort of still carrying on along that route, or have you developed any new sort of ways to do that now?
We continue to evolve and tweak it all the time, and make it point at different manufacturers' rule sets as we're asked to kind of make that work further. And we've done further work in conjunction with Symetri. So some of these rule sets are publicly available now. But yeah, we continue to use it on some projects, and we hope that it just shows a kind of advancement of the overlay of BIM coordination techniques with some kind of thoughts around information management and where that belongs in models, because that's kind of, we need to look for things like fire ratings and where builders' work openings are and various things in models to get that right.
Excellent. No, it sounds like you're doing some amazing stuff already. And I guess, so moving away from the sort of technical side of it then, what has the response been to the Building Safety Act and the BS 8644 standard from your point of view? And how do you think it will impact the industry and that sort of design and BIM process in particular?
Yeah, good question. So I think generally it's been positive. We're seeing lots of inquiries coming in from clients who are actively thinking about what this means to them and how they might need to address their organisation in order to meet these requirements. And similarly, there are lots of things coming out of industry now that are pointing at the way forward for these things, and 8644 Part 1, I guess, is one of those things that's starting to shape how we might achieve that. But I think the effect that the Building Safety Act will have on industry is far more profound than the original BIM mandate was. The BIM mandate was setting out to achieve efficiency on projects and efficiency in operation, and dangled the carrot of the promise of public sector work for the industry to kind of catch up and play along with that. Where the Building Safety Act is kind of saying we need to use these principles and these processes in order to drive building safety, and if we don't, there are ramifications, which I think the BIM mandate didn't do initially. But the ultimate price is people have lost their lives through some of this information being mismanaged. So I think it's gonna force clients, and it's going to force project teams into better delivering information so that buildings can be managed more safely, not just more efficiently. And I think that's going to have a more profound effect. And I think it's going to put a lot more pressure on, contractors in the first instance, but then design teams by proxy to deliver the information that clients don't just think they need to comply with the process. They actually do need to make sure that their buildings are safe.
And I guess that sort of leads on to the next thing, and you've kind of already touched on it, but from your experience so far, what are the biggest challenges for people remaining compliant with fire stopping and digitising the associated processes?
Yeah, another good question. So I think, picking on fire stopping specifically, fire stopping is a very small part of the kind of fire safety agenda overall, but some of the failings that I think I see in fire stop design, specification, and kind of installation, I suppose, and then management by the client, starts with the placement of scope on the professional team. So being absolutely prescriptive about whose responsibility it is to design and specify. And then the counterpart to that is like actually what good fire stop design and specification looks like. Because we've seen a lot of different examples of fire stop design and specification that I think places a lot of risk onto the contractor, who then inherits that design and specification and then has to try and demonstrate at the end that they've got a compliant solution that passes building regs and makes a safe place to be occupied. I think the days of naming a fire stop manufacturer pre-contract and just saying, it's for the main contractor to resolve, that day is gone. I think main contractors are getting wise to that being a poor way to design and specify, and hopefully the processes we've established will put a bit more rigor into the pre-contract design process and reduce risk for everyone, not just the contractor, but for the client and people who are living in these buildings as well.
I think, we've been speaking to customers, and that it's good to hear that everyone is sort of on the same page with that. They're all saying, it shouldn't really just be on the contractors now. It's got to come before and in the design phase. So that's really interesting to hear. And kind of answers my next question, because who do you think will find it the most challenging to adopt all of these new measures, and who will need the most help?
I think it's a difficult one to answer because the fire stop design and specification process touches a lot of different parties. But I think it's particularly challenging in the first instance, I think, for the main contractor, because even if they do inherit a really robust design and specification for fire stops, they still have to manage multi-party input to get a wall constructed with an opening in the right place of the right size, and then services constructed to the right service spacings, and the product installed correctly in conjunction with the manufacturer's details in order for that to be compliant. So I think ultimately they have one of the hardest jobs. But similarly, then looking at that pre-contract kind of issue and trying to get the design and specification right before it gets to before a contract is let, then I think it kind of sits with the lead designer and making sure that the scope is placed clearly on them and they have the right skills and knowledge to be able to do and deliver fire stop design and specification appropriately. And I think there's a big kind of learning curve, and I think it's it's upon the industry to better define what, like I said before, what good fire stop design and specification looks like.
Yeah, and how do you think we'll kind of get there? It's probably a difficult question, but is there more that the government needs to do, or is there some kind of steering group? How do you see us getting there?
I feel like one of the challenges is around the way fire stop test data is presented, because there's no kind of standard way of presenting it. Some products will be tested, but not all scenarios for each product will be tested, and then it's presented in tables which will look different from manufacturer to manufacturer. And when we've done work in the past, we've had to take a lot of time by having calls with fire stop manufacturers to work out the kind of criteria that we're testing against. So I think if there was an industry body that could standardize the way that data was presented, it would make it much easier to test and check and compare product A versus product B, which at the moment I think is a challenge that we face, and I think that would help significantly. And then it would better facilitate turning that data into the rule set that we use in tools like Symetri. I think that would help a lot. And I guess getting all fire stop manufacturers, getting behind and being supportive of this whole digital testing process to prove that design's compliant. Like I know manufacturers like Hilti, for instance, have quite large departments that support BIM as a process and have model components and various things like that. So I think, again, if all the manufacturers could come together and agree on what good looks like in terms of components and how they should be used, I think that would be a positive thing.
Yeah, we are sort of on that early journey. That might come out of it soon, who knows. But this kind of leads on to the next question as well. So how can we help that? What can we do in the industry? What improvements should tech companies be making, or the manufacturing companies be making to support organizations to comply with the act and the standard?
Promoting collaboration from industry is quite an interesting point, and I think I see quite different skills coming into the kind of design end of the industry now, and people coming in with heightened kind of computer and coding skills than when I joined the industry 20 or so years ago. And if I think about the way that some clients procure consultant teams by setting kind of design competitions and asking groups to get together and try and resolve it in a collaborative way, I think it'd be really interesting if technology vendors and or industry bodies got together and offered an incentive for different parts of the industry to work together as kind of collaborative teams and join up as designers and contractors and technology vendors in a bid to try and fix what the industry problem is. And I think with the combination of those who are designing and those who are constructing and those who are making the tools and those who are making the rules that govern our industry, with a combination of kind of financial rewards and maybe the organization's names going against these new processes, would be quite a good incentive for people to put their best minds together and resolve some of these challenges.
It's not something we've really ever seen before, is it? And like I mentioned to you, we've been speaking with customers and they're all sort of saying the same thing. We need this collaborative approach. But I guess in terms of actually getting to that point, it's a bit difficult. But we're also trying to encourage people. The Building Safety Act and the standard looks at the buildings that are over 18 meters high, and then people are thinking, oh, I don't work on projects of that sort of size, this probably doesn't apply to me. But it's all about just getting people to think in that way of the data and getting into that habit of just using it on all projects sort of thing. That sort of, how do you think we can get to that point as well? Or do you think there will be a point where this will be rolled out across all buildings that don't meet this criteria? What are your thoughts on that?
I think the bar was initially set, I suppose, to align with the challenges that were experienced at Grenfell, in that these high-rise, often high-density tower blocks can be quite difficult places to escape from in the event of a fire. So it had to start somewhere, and the bar had to be set reasonably high so that the ramifications of the act didn't spiral right the way down into industry, into all building types, and send the whole industry into a tailspin. I think it will eventually apply to more buildings than just those, and whether that's through legislation or whether that just happens through osmosis, I think is to be seen. But I think if we think about the original BIM mandate set by the government, which applied to public sector projects, that saw other parts of the industry that weren't so committed to public sector projects actually investing in BIM processes and thinking about client organisations writing their requirements, and those who are working on those projects investing in tools and ways of working to deliver those projects. So I feel like these are good practices for what are deemed to be some of the riskiest buildings for occupants at the moment, and it will naturally affect more buildings, and whether that happens through legislation or not, I think it will happen anyway for other building types.
Yeah. And then where do you sort of see the industry in 5, 10, 20 years time in relation to fire safety? You kind of just touched on it there, but we've also got other sort of pressures coming into the industry as well. Where do you think we will be? Do you think it will just be sort of business as usual? How do you think we'll get there?
I don't know about the time frames, but I think if it was short, medium, and long term sort of time frames, I think we will get better definition in the short term around what golden thread means and how and what should be required to deliver it. I think that's important, and that'll come through with some of the other parts of the Safety Act when they're passed. And I think as a result, and we're seeing it already, but I think it's just going to extend further, and that clients are going to demand better information management from industry, and that's going to drive better results from industry. And then I think in the longer term, I'd hope that those practices and the technology that supports those processes will become business as usual for some of the client organizations, so that some of the outputs that are coming from BIM processes from projects are being better realized by client organizations and actively managed and kept up to date as will be required under some of these new pieces of legislation. So I think that's where I hope it'll end up.
So what's next for you personally? Will your focus be on helping your team and your clients deal with the legislation, or are there any other challenges on your plate and for Ridge and Partners in general?
I guess a combination of factors relates to those. So we're actively using low-code tools like Airtable to try and better join things up and rise to certain challenges. So a couple of things that I hope we do is we're kind of putting together building safety cases in conjunction with our property consultants in the business, and trying to digitalize those and deliver those more intelligently. And similarly use that same technology to better or to enhance, I suppose, the multidisciplinary design process. And again, by kind of joining bits of information and responsibilities for who's delivering what and when. So that's kind of in our pipeline, and we'll mature that over the next few weeks and months and see how that goes.
Excellent, great. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Brent. We look forward to seeing what you guys get up to and how you will continue to innovate with the creation of smarter buildings. Don't forget to follow, subscribe to ensure you don't miss an episode.